Hey there, welcome back to the vlog. There is a phrase that I've heard a lot of just recently, which is the new normal. This started off sounding like something that was a temporary state, and as the weeks went by, this sort of temporariness became more permanent. So it went from being a couple of weeks to maybe it will be till the summer or September. And now it's like 2021. And you can start to hear the beginnings of a rumble where possibly this is 2 years, maybe 3 years, or even longer. It became apparent rather quickly that everybody was assuming this would be a sort of V-shape recovery. It would recover as fast as what it fell apart, basically. And there was almost like an expectation that we would go from 100%, let's say, down to 30 or 40%, but then come back up to 100% again. The various bailouts that governments around the world were suddenly coming up with kind of reinforced this mental model that things would recover back to 100% of where it was, and when this recovery happened, it would be business as usual, and we would continue as if nothing ever happened. There's just one problem here. Common sense tells you that it's not going to be a V-shaped recovery. Common sense also tells us that it cannot go back to 100% of what it was before this pandemic started. Imagine, as an example, that you are an airline, that your business has been impacted, you've suddenly taken government assistance, and the idea is that you are paying for your staff and your aircraft and all of the facilities to basically sit and do nothing. And then at some point, let's say August, September, it's going to bounce back to 100% and everybody goes back to work, and it's almost as if nothing ever happened. Using the USA as a very good model of this, we already know that a potential 100,000 of the future passengers are never ever going to get on a plane again. In addition to those who unfortunately died, there's also 40 million jobless claims now with the US, which means that those people aren't going to be flying either. So let's just, after that, look at those who are left that still have jobs. Well, common sense also tells us that they're likely to be scared to travel, either for financial or health reasons, and so they're probably just tightening their belts and saving their money as well, which means they won't be flying either. It's very highly likely that these people are worried that their job is actually next. As I record this, it's the last day of May 2020. The first quarter of 2020 from an economic standpoint was pretty dismal. But remember that the economy was going for the first couple of weeks of the year. The second quarter, so running April, May and June of 2020, is going to be the quarter where things really start to bite. The end result is when this quarter finishes, the economic data that comes out of it will reinforce what everybody has basically been fearing, but again, using common sense, you can see it coming. If the businesses were only open for a part of quarter one, but haven't really been open at all for quarter two, the chances are that the data for this quarter is going to be much worse come July when these numbers come out. The end result of this is a lot of people who currently aren't spooked by the economy will become spooked, and they in turn will also start to tighten their belts. This is probably going to affect businesses more when we get to that point in the year than it did to the consumers who tightened their belts a lot earlier. So the end result of that is that you're more likely to see more layoffs, you are likely to see less lending from places like banks and financial institutions, which also is then going to have the additional knock-on effect to the people who are already living paycheck to paycheck, who suddenly can't borrow as much because the banks are now tightening their belts as well. This creates a vicious cycle for modern economies. You might think that your primary job is being an architect or a teacher or a utility worker, but in a modern economy, your primary job is to be a consumer. Your job is basically to buy stuff. And it's this consumerism that drives the modern economy. You are tracked and tagged on a monthly basis where companies are trying to work out how to either part you from your money or trying to incentivize you to part with your money, because that's what keeps the economy going. This rise of consumerism is nothing new. It's been talked about for decades, but from a practical standpoint, this is the first time we've ever seen the consumer-centric economy suddenly collapse. When this economy collapsed so hard, it showed us exactly how many eggs were in this one basket. It also showed us what other baskets are connected to this basket. This sudden lack of consumerism is going to hurt more than just retail jobs and retail malls and rents. If you look at an indicator such as the Hapax Index, which shows you, the cost of containers being moved around on ships, which is basically an indicator of how much in the way of finished goods are moving around at sea, you can already see at this point in the year where things would normally start to be ramping up for Thanksgiving and later on in Christmas. The prices are really cheap at the moment, which means that basically not as many containers are being used. Everybody is already cutting back on what they're ordering from Asia and other countries in anticipation of a very, very poor showing at the end of the year. But you're not seeing that in the news yet. You'll probably see that come around Black Friday and especially leading up to Christmas, when all of a sudden there will be this moment of realization that Christmas isn't going to be what it was in previous years. But the signs are already there right now. This is about as good of a crystal ball as I could find in the middle of spring. A lot of the bailout money from the governments has been used to prop up stocks and shares, and this again reflects what I was saying earlier about the sort of V-shape recovery. The reality is now playing out, given that the economy has been slowed down this much for several months, that at best it could be a U-shaped recovery because it sort of came down and now we're going to go along, and then hopefully, if everybody's positive thinking goes the way that they hope it would, it will quickly go back up again. But again, using common sense, you know that it's more likely to be an L-shaped recovery where it comes down quickly, but then it takes a very long time, going almost horizontally and maybe just incrementing bit by bit over a long period in order to get the recovery back to at least some higher state if it's not going to get to 100%. This means that the Fed in the US and other central banks around the world, they're basically left with two choices. The first choice is to just print money, and the second choice is to not print any money and try to force some other economic situation to transpire in a bid to kickstart the economy. The US has already basically said that it's going to just keep printing money and that there was no limit on how much it was going to print. So what I basically did as a result of that was any spare cash that was left over at the end of the month. I mean, I've basically been converting it out into things like silver bars and, I just don't trust what they're doing right now with the fiat currency. What happens in the US always affects us up here in Canada. So my basic response to that is, let's get rid of that. And same thing here. Yeah, I've got this year's silver maples, and I will keep buying this with the money that's left over in my budget at the end of every month, just so that I'm not holding it as cash. Now, obviously, this is not financial advice. Go speak to a financial advisor, but this is what I'm doing. I'm basically taking my spare cash and converting it back out of cash. As everybody might know, if you've been following me for years, I am a little bit of a silver bug to start off with anyway. And also, given that right now the gold to silver ratio has been as high as it is, something's going to correct. So buying the silver right now, to me at least, seems like a good idea, because when that gold to silver ratio corrects, then it will either go down to a point where I can convert over to gold at a much better exchange rate than had I bought the gold in the first place. And if the very worst sort of situation collapses, well, you know, I've got something still in the way of a store of wealth that I can barter or pay for stuff with. So, yeah, that's where I am with that one. The coming months will be an interesting time. You know, like many people, I don't know exactly what's going to happen, the same as many other people don't know what's going to happen. For our generation, this is kind of uncharted territory. There's no sort of precedent for us, and we all have the same handicap in that none of us have a crystal ball. But what we can do is use common sense to try and work out what's going to happen next. So that's what I wanted to talk about today. If you like these videos, give them a thumbs up. If you want to see more, hit subscribe, and I'll speak to you soon. All right, bye.